Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. I am your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me today is our very special guest, Kirsten DeMelo. Kirsten DeMelo is an active board member at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore. She has been a student, a facilitator, and a lecturer on the work by Joanna de Angelis. Kirsten was born in Pennsylvania, and she was born of Spiritist parents. And this is important because it talks about her entire upbringing within a spiritualist, and a Spiritist background. She has been part of the Spiritist Society of Philadelphia before moving to Maryland about a decade ago in 2011. She has also presented in the Spiritist Medical Congress and has also appeared in multiple presentations, the Spiritist Symposia in the US. Professionally, Kirsten is a registered nurse and has a Bachelor of Science degree with experience in critical care, case management, and utilization management. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore. This organization was created initially in 1998 in Baltimore, Maryland. And it's an organization that is committed to spreading the Spiritist teachings as a means to raise spiritual awareness to the community. It is also affiliated with the United States Spiritist Federation. If you are interested in learning more about SSB, as it's known by our friends, please visit ssbaltimore.org. The Psychology and Spirituality program is also sponsored by AME Brazil, United States Spiritist Federation, TV Mansão do Caminho, and the International Spiritist Council. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you'd like to check out additional information about this program, please go to spiritist.us. Kirsten is here with me to discuss how this is a tough topic, right, Kirsten? How this subject is of male chauvinism contributes to conflicts, conflictive behaviors, existential conflicts in general. But if you're interested to know more about this subject, I'm going to share my screen now, Kirsten. If you know more about the subject specifically, we recommend you to this book written by Joanna de Angelis with the collaboration by Divaldo Pereira Franco, Finding Peace and Health. Great book. I would like to also invite each one of you to please send your questions, send your feedback, remarks, comments, if you don't understand or if you want to contribute to this conversation. We'll have a special episode to address them, and we really appreciate you contributing to this conversation via chat. But let me go back to you, Kirsten. It is so good to have you here. Can you say hello to the public?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Marcia, for having me here today with you. It's an honor, and I'm excited for us to have this conversation. It's a much needed conversation.
I agree with you. But let's begin by just saying we, both of us, wish everyone a happy International Women's Day, which is celebrated every year on the 8th of March. And before we begin really tackling chauvinism, I just have to say, Kirsten, whew, oh my goodness, conflicts in relationships are just, they're hard, right? They're complex. And we are just I just feel like we're a big bucket prone to those conflicts. And if I were to use a business language, I would say those conflicts, they have root causes, yes, and there are more than one. They have a temporary countermeasure, And those are really the mechanism by which we counter the issues that we face in relationships. And they're like temporary and urgent. They may not really address or the problem or being effective, right? And may lead to worse problems, in fact. And again, in business language, the permanent countermeasure. Kirsten, as one of five girls, right? A family of six, but five sisters. We just born in the northeast of Brazil, which is a country and specific that region very well known for its male chauvinism. So there, as I read the books, right, about the topic, and I immerse myself specifically on that book, that resource that we referenced earlier by Joanna de Angelis, it really made very clear to me how accepted and normalized this behavior is societally. And on the other hand, I have lived in the US for the majority of my life. I work in a multinational global company. And Kirsten, for the past 10 years, I've seen the company specifically try to address gender equality or inequality in this case in the workplace. Many different initiatives are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of the practice. There's all of this, and I don't believe we're there yet. Can we perhaps talk a little bit about how chauvinism has been so hard to eradicate in our society? And Kirsten, was Joanna a feminist at her time? What do you think?
Well, first, I think we have to define what feminist is, because
Mhm,
modern day feminism is quite different from the initial feminist movement that was happening in New York, and well, not just New York, in many places, but with the suffragettes and the suffrage movement, and just so much of what women were fighting for, you know, decades ago, the right to vote is different from what it is nowadays. It seems, to some extent, there's more of an extreme. So, was Joanna a feminist, or is Joanna a feminist? I think she was or is, but more so with the original feminist movement, not so much the one that has taken on, an extreme. Sort of behavior or characteristics
can
where
you
women.
tell me about those characteristics, maybe?
Yeah,
Sorry
no,
to interrupt
definitely.
you, but maybe we can give that as the background
Yeah.
by which
No,
this is such an important discussion,
yeah,
right?
definitely. So I would say the initial feminist movement was about giving women the opportunity to be able to work outside of the home, to be able to go to medical school, and be able to vote and have a voice.
Mhm,
Whereas nowadays we do have that. Still working on some inequalities, but in comparison to what we were working on probably or looking at 100 years ago, we've come a long way. But
mhm,
nowadays, it seems like there are some radicalists that just call themselves feminists. I don't think that they self-identify as a radicalist, but they call
mhm,
themselves a feminist, and they are they are encouraging promiscuity. They're encouraging abortions. They are encouraging women to live as reckless as some irresponsible men have, and
mhm.
that living that way will make us equal, and that's what we have to do. And it's not. It's a fallacy. It's it's just a corruption of what an original idea of feminism, to liberate women so we could, you know, be a valuable citizen, to trying to go the other end of the extreme into making women into really slaves again, slaves to sexuality,
Yeah.
slaves to all these negative things. But I'll stop there, give you
No,
a
no,
chance.
I want you to be very specific. Let's be clear. What are you really talking about? Because I think there's a question here that the undertone of this conversation, which is uh, sex, which is, and the words that come to mind that you find in specifically in this book by Joanna de Angelis are um, possession, superiority, right? So male superiority versus a female inferiority. There's a question of, because of it, males owned female, and Joanna is super
Yeah.
cool because she gives us very specific examples in time that we can talk about it, we can talk about it later, but they're there, right?
Yeah.
And then she talks about the fact that, because, and this is body, and I think that's what you're talking about, right, Kirsten? The physical, the physical nature of women, which is born and raised and created a certain way. I'm not being very clear here, because of its readiness for maternity.
Hmm.
Then we're comparing a society that we can go back all the way in the beginning of the beginning, where my power, my superpower, if we joke about it, was the strength of my body, right?
Hmm.
And we're
Yeah.
talking about warriors being the leaders of small nations or tribes, and that, Kirsten, that is long gone.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, I don't we don't need that. We don't need the
Yeah.
body muscle, the muscle mass to be able to say I'm better than you because
Yeah.
I'm stronger that way. Can we talk a little bit about
Yes.
how all of this is really being
Yes.
mistaken in how we talk about male chauvinism today?
Yes. So I think we have to understand that the psychology and the evolutionary
Hmm.
psychology behind
Hmm.
why. So, I mean, from a physical standpoint, men are
Hmm.
physically different. Generally speaking, we could say
Hmm.
that men tend to be physically more stronger than women.
Hmm.
Although nowadays we know, you can go into the gym and join CrossFit and, lift just as much as a man can. But from an evolutionary standpoint, men were always, and from, since we are spiritists and we believe in reincarnation, and we take with us all of the
Hmm.
experiences that we have. So, and Joanna kind of talks about this as well. So when someone has like so many experiences as a man, reincarnating multiple times, when you carry a lot of those traits with you, and through learned behavior, whatever you want to, however you want to define it
Hmm.
culturally. So men have, as you were explaining in the beginning, needed to be really strong to fight off, and protect the female. And to some extent, some of that still stays with us. There was a study. I gave a lecture recently, and I quoted the study, and I can't remember offhand, but we can put it in the podcast notes somewhere, once I find it and give it to you, Marcia. Yeah, Marcia. Um, but it said that they researched, they interviewed like thousands of women, and there was like
Hmm.
a percentage that were feminists and others that were self-identifying as not as a feminist. But they found that
Hmm.
80% of the women that they, give or take 80%,
Hmm.
were identifying as a modern day feminist. That they, were pro women's rights, they were pro abortion, they were pro, promiscuity, a lot of things that were on, that are what I would consider, and I think Joanna considers this as well, as on the extreme. Um,
Hmm.
but what was interesting is that these women, who were proclaiming that they didn't need a man, they didn't want to have children, they don't, they can just be by themselves. These same women, when asked the same question, of what kind of man do you prefer, they still preferred a man that could protect them, that could provide for them. So it's kind of confusing, the results, I think, to many people that read this study, because it's like, okay,
Hmm.
wait a second. We have women that are saying, no, I don't need a man. I don't want a man. I don't want
Yeah.
children. But yet you still like all the qualities of what you
Yeah.
deem chauvinistic. So I think it's really important for us to define, like, what is what.
Can I
So,
add something, maybe?
yeah.
Because I have not read your study, and I really want to see it, to see that very conflict, and I don't mean that in the term that we're talking about, but that paradox of
Paradox, yeah,
I
paradoxical.
I don't want to be seen as in need of protection, but inherently this is
Yes.
how I define the quote unquote the better man, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit about what Joanna talks here as we continue this conversation, because she introduced to us the fact, the notion, right, that we have this thousands of years, this legacy that is embedded in the collective unconscious.
Yes.
So she goes back to in Western society, right? um, this idea of male chauvinism dates all the way back to the Mosaic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So we, as Judeo-Christian, from a cultural perspective, we inherited that,
Yep.
right? And it goes back to, Joanna says, all the way back to God as this anthropomorphic creator
Mm-hmm.
and angry Kirsten, not a father, is a volatile father, as she
Mm-hmm.
calls. And then she talks about the notion of archetypes, right? This is an archetypal construction that is reinforced later by many other things in history. So I just wanted to say, maybe, if you don't mind, we can spend a few minutes talking about that, what is behind the scene for all those paradoxes that we're bringing when we discuss, am I a feminist or not? Am I a modern or an original feminist? What are the notions of how I deal with my body, my sexuality? And remember, when we talk about some of the issues in the conflicts that we have in relationships, one of the issues that Joanna brings very, very upfront center is I I may become a prostitute, right? Or I can go to adultery. Those two interesting countermeasures to the conflict in a relationship, which are have a sexual connotation in them, that don't really address the issue at hand. So pause for definitions, and forgive me if you know this already, but let's talk a little bit about what is this collective unconscious. So back to Jung, right? Carl Gustav Jung. He says collective unconscious, this is straight from the dictionary, is part of the unconscious mind which is derived from that ancestral memory and experience. And voila, it's common to everyone, every human that is part of this experience that we're living right now, and it's very distinct from individual unconscious. So why is it so important, right? Why is it that we need to understand that this collective unconscious exists as part of our unconscious, right? And he really, if we talk about it, it really uh, Jung, after he left Freud, and um, he, their relationship as partners really was fractured over his criticism. And I bring this because we're talking about sexuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
His criticisms of how Freud emphasized his entire development psychology based on how he looked at sexuality,
Yep.
and that, I love it, led to what we bring here as analytical psychology, which is the psychological approach that Jung later developed. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about it. I don't want to take too long, but I think this is fascinating as I remounted to myself and my upbringing in a country that is very sexist and chauvinistic, in a part of the country that is even more so than the rest, and in a family where we're all basically females. And I never really perceived some things because you just project what you know what's right, right? But back at you, Kirsten. What are your thoughts from what's going on today and how we really don't understand how those roles that we adopt are really archetypal in nature?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think to answer your question, I mean, it's important for us to know and understand a little bit about the collective unconscious because I mean, it's part of what drives us. It's part of our makeup. I'm trying to think of the word to describe it, but it influences us and how we think
Mm-hmm.
today. And so that it's a big part of what influences us. So it
Mm-hmm.
has to be taken into account in order for us to understand who we are, why we think the way that we think, and but in terms of what is going on in the world today, what we're seeing is instead of women just fighting to have equal rights, we're seeing what I would, from my perspective, extremism,
Mm-hmm.
radicalism, where instead of teaching women, and Joanna talks about this, and I'll touch on it in a second,
Mm-hmm.
to value what we bring to the table, who we are, as women. We have, my ancestral baggage, if you will, that I carry with me to my
Mm-hmm.
benefit, and who I am as this immortal spirit living many lifetimes. I can only assume as a woman. We have maternal instincts. We have this way of being that is unique from a man. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it is seen as being less of or less than, but indeed it's not. It's something that it should be valued both from a male perspective and a female perspective.
Yeah.
And even the section in this part of the book that you showed earlier, it's page 69 is where the chapter begins. There's a three-part section, and
Mm-hmm.
the section where she talks about, I think she titles it Feminism, when she talks about that women, we are not built to be promiscuous. We are not built, our physiology, our psychology, we're not, not to say that it's okay for men to be that way, but the way in which we are, our motherly instinct, our instinct to come bring together a family to take care of, it's not in our nature to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it's being able to look at who we are, what we are, and embrace that, and embrace all the strengths that we have. And it seems like right now, as I'm looking at modern society, we are looking at the attempts to destroy family values and the family unit. And Joanna
Mm-hmm.
talks about this, not just in this book, but in other books, that the
Mm-hmm.
family is the cell of society. And if you want to
Mm-hmm.
break down society, you break down from the smallest cell, and that
Mm-hmm.
is family. So right
Mm-hmm.
now we're having all sorts of attacks on the family unit as itself, in and of itself. And men, also equally, so I do believe nowadays, because of this radicalism, are getting a bad rap. Men that want to provide for their families are seen as, chauvinists, which isn't
Mm-hmm.
always the case. Are there men that believe themselves to be superior? Of course there are. But there is also men who just want to take care of their family, that in their heart of hearts, they want to be able to do that. And then there are women that are seen as inferior because they want to be, in the home, or to work in the home and to care for the children, that is beneath them. And Joanna says,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's not. If you want to have a career outside, that's okay. You can have a family and have a career, but with all things, you can't be extreme. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want a career, of course, you can't neglect what you have at home. So there has to be, a balance, and there can be. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of confusion right now as
Can
to,
you? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
there's just so much confusion, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of herd mentality where
Mm-hmm.
people want to follow what's cool,
Mm-hmm.
what's hip right now. And right now,
Mm-hmm.
what's hip, what's cool, what's in vogue is for women to be free and liberated,
Mm-hmm.
to be promiscuous and to not care, and to not want a family, for a woman not to have kids because you don't need to. This is
Mm-hmm.
what's popular. So there are a lot of women, because it's what's popular, are just hitching a ride on that bandwagon. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
worst thing. We're killing
Mm-hmm.
so much work that the initial feminists did, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
decades ago, what they literally blood, sweat, and tears fought to have a voice. We're killing all of that, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, because
Mm-hmm.
we are damaging who we are, as our potentials as women, um, and just morality in general.
Yeah.
So I'll
Yeah.
stop there because I want to hear what you have to say too.
No, I was just lots of questions coming to my mind. One of them is, and I want to put that, let's make a note, put that at the end. But the first question that came to my mind, which I want you to answer at the end, is what do we want to tell our children and our children's children about what is this notion that so beautifully written in so many of the works by Joanna de Angelis, and it marries psychology and spirituality regarding feminism and chauvinism, and how you're almost there. How do we attain that balance, right? Which is the one that does not betray us and our own conflicts that we bring with us. So that's the last question. But one of the things that came to my mind when you're talking right now is the fact that we are influenced, right, Kirsten, by that ancestral baggage that we bring, and we don't even know that.
Mhm.
But as we mentioned before, we are immortal. We believe in the immortality of our souls, which leads to the conclusion that the dogma, if you will, that the dogma of reincarnation, which is you will live and you live after this life and you will live after this life, but there is no sanctity, or sanctification is the better term, of once your body disintegrates, when there is a corporeal death, you don't become a saint, even though somehow we tend to believe that. uh, we continue with all the set of beliefs that our experience provided us, to include the gender that you lived. It's an inherent part of our experience. So from that perspective, I just wanted to bring one notion here to everyone, just a definition, again, very um, from from a dictionary definition, because some of the things that Jung brought to us in the idea of collective unconscious was also the archetypes, right? And those archetypes really, they're important for us to understand, because those are the projections that you use. So what are archetypes? And forgive me if you know, but for those who do not, archetypes simply means the universal, and this is the character, right? It's not about Kirsten or Marcia or anybody you know, but those are universal models. Those are behaviors and personality that will influence our human behavior. So what Jung tells us is that those archetypes, they originate from the collective unconscious. So, as such, they will somehow organize how we go about our lives, how we experience life in itself. And it's very interesting, just as a plug, if you like to read, the he says, Jung, in his book The Structure of the Psyche, that the most powerful ideas in history are linked to that notion of archetype. So it's really important that we understand, because somehow, based on the fact that we don't really think about it, we have behaviors that may bring to certain concerns as we are perhaps bystanders to this modern, and I'm quoting you, Kirsten, this modern feminism and how they express themselves, or maybe we are as witnesses to this. No, what is it? Back to that question: what is it we want to tell our children and our children's children about feminism?
That's a great question. And I pause not because I don't know. I pause because it's a loaded question, and I want to be intentional in expressing myself. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that what in my mind, what we I would want to pass down to my children, and hopefully to my children pass that down to their children, and so forth and so on, is essentially what Joanna talks about in this chapter of this
Mm-hmm.
book, and in other parts and other books as well. This idea that, celebrate who you are.
Yes.
And it's also important to note that if we're, and I don't want to get into the a discussion about, because I know this is a whole other discussion in of itself, that gender dysphoria. But when we're born into the body that we're born into, and the gender that we're born into, it's for a reason. It's for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for us not to fight that, but to try and embrace it and learn from it, because there's a purpose in it. If God, the high spirits, have put this together for us, this reincarnatory plan, if you will, there is a purpose in it for us to learn and observe and to grow and to flourish
Mm-hmm.
wherever we are planted. And here, so to speak, I'm planted in this particular physical body. So let me embrace it. And there's something beautiful about being a woman, about, being able to give birth, being able to have uh, that gift. It is indescribable. It is absolutely indescribable. It should be revered. It should be something that it should be cherished,
Mm-hmm.
that all women should cherish that about
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Now, is this to say that I would pass this along and say, well, you must be a mother, you must have X amount of children? No, of course, some women are just not either going to have, some women may have reproductive issues, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. And each person, each their own. But
Mm-hmm.
it is something beautiful, I would say, to pass on this
Mm-hmm.
idea of embracing your femininity,
Mm-hmm.
embracing the strengths that you have, and not looking down on it. So if you feel you want to embrace your femininity, and if that looks like, well, I want to be a mother, I want to be a stay-at-home mom, or I want to, make raising my children at home my career, that's okay. You're not less of a human being because of that. But if you feel like you want to have, a job outside of your home, that's okay too. And everything, you have to find a balance. And I would say that don't go with whatever is the new, in vogue at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
My own mother used to say this, that morality doesn't change from, one generation to the next. Morality maintains its integrity, its validity, regardless of what generation we're in. Although we like to think that it changes,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't. So, feminism for me is just embracing your femininity, your value, your importance as a woman. We're not less than a man. We're not more than a man. We're just different. In the same way that men are just different, they're not better than us, they have other qualities that they are meant to embrace in
Mm-hmm.
the physical body that they're in. Will we reach a point as we evolve, because we know that the spirit has no gender, of course? Will we evolve to a point in some distant planetary system where, our physical bodies will be as such where we won't have a gender? I don't know. But what I do know, as for right now, the foreseeable future, this is where I find myself on my evolutionary journey. And the more any of us rebel against our own self, when we rebel against, the realities we find ourselves in, we cause ourselves much more pain. When we learn about
Yes.
acceptance,
Yes.
In the Gospel According to Spiritism, there's a chapter that's
Mhm.
entitled Obedience and Resignation. And that's both for males and females. That's not just a female thing, but it's more so towards when we think of our lives, not submitting to another gender,
Mm.
not submitting blindly to, your partner, your husband, but submitting to the laws of God, submitting to an understanding and being in acceptance. So I'll stop there because I don't want to hog up this conversation.
No, it's awesome because you bring so many issues for us, and maybe some of the words that ring a bell to me is, does the obedience, right? Does obedience and resignation really imply a submissive attitude? No, it does not, right? Obedience and resignation really has a direct relationship with respect, with honor, with courage to embrace yourself, courage not to fight. And as we go back to that idea of conflicts in relationship, it's all about, instead of driving into this inner core of who you are, and really embracing the notion that we humans, we are supposed to feel, to be one with our sentiments. And oh, all the conflicts that I bring, I prefer not to. And I prefer to fall blindly into stereotypes based on some archetypes. And I may be unjustly and cowardly, if I may, treating myself, my body, in that whole exchange between me and the rest of the world from a gender perspective,
Yeah.
right? You mentioned, I believe earlier, we were talking, Kirsten, at a different conversation, and you mentioned a phenomenon called, I'm a feminist because we are discussing body counts. And I didn't even know what that was about. It's rather just that, let's compare tit for tat. You can have multiple partners. I should have the same, and that should equalize our
Yeah.
experience. And we know, very, very immature way to discuss your
Yeah.
strength, right?
Yeah.
I look at myself, Kirsten, and I see that I too have certain biases in terms of how I see the world, and I judge um, the shackles, I can say, the enslavement to a projected body type, right? That is unattainable. And it is so unattainable that now I am submitting myself to terrible procedures to be what I'm not, which is not leading to what you said just now, right? Let us use this opportunity in this discussion to awaken in us the desire to honor and respect and embrace our own identity with all that we bring with us, all the baggage, and understanding there, historically speaking, so
Yeah.
many points. So we are very close to wrap up. Surprisingly, it just goes so fast, right, Kirsten? I
It
wanted
really
to know,
does.
do you remember the story behind the 8th of March for International Women's Day?
I don't. I don't remember the story.
Yeah, so let me remote it to everyone here. It actually goes back, and this is really terrible for us to even talk about it, but it was on March 8th of 1857 in New York, when the women that worked with garments, they would be working for 16 hours straight, and they went out and they protested. They wanted 10-hour shifts. And this is important because we talk about unfair and lack of justice in the treatment as a worker. This is the condition at the time, mid 19th century. What happened was the police was called. The
Mm.
police actually
I remember the story now.
yeah, right. They chased them into a factory, and they saw these women as criminals and rebelling against the status quo. This is important, right? The rebellious nature of fighting what was the norm at the time, and they were put into this factory and they were burned to death. So as we, perhaps not this year, but maybe in the future years, if as we talk about um, gender equality, and we talk about perhaps feminism, original, today, whatever it is, your brand of feminism that you're contemplating, reading about, considering, right? Versus also a very chauvinistic or sexist behavior that men and women may have. Let's think about and let's honor all of those women that died to bring justice and to bring the treatment, because we women have the right to education. We, because we have a different physical makeup, it does not mean that we're weaker. We're intelligent. We are sensitive. We are also equally able to construct, to be co-creator of this world that we live in, the society that we live in. So let's forget, or perhaps try to forget, all our confusion on dealing with gender inequality from a way that, based on maybe 2000 years ago, reverted to I'm imprisoned to a marriage because my parents, um, right, they arranged this marriage, and I'm now a possession to this husband. Or the fact that in that marriage, there is, sexually speaking, I don't have access to the pleasure as, let's say, your partner, and you go into different ways of dealing with your own sexuality. Let's not just revert what it was to what it is right now, just the reversal, the negative image of the same issue. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Why don't you give your thoughts as we conclude this really interesting and insightful conversation about male chauvinism?
Oh, definitely. I think that if my last thoughts that I'll leave for any of those that are listening is to go and read this particular book and this particular chapter, this section of the book, to better understand. I think the best thing we can do is what the high spirits told us to do, is to educate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
To love one another and to educate ourselves, and that's the best thing. And the most important thing that we can do is read, study, understand from a spiritist perspective, from this immortal perspective. Because if we were to look at ourselves from one life only, we could live one way. But from the fact that we are immortal, the fact that we do have we live many lives, gives a different flavor and a different taste. And in all things, really try not to judge others and try to
Mm-hmm.
understand. And I say this because there's a lot of things that are going on in our world today, a lot of movements that are trying to destabilize so much of what we've worked for as women for so many decades. And that's why it's important for us to educate ourselves. What are we really trying to give up and trying to gain here? By being a modern feminist. Again, I don't think anyone calls themselves that. I'm saying this for us to distinguish between what started out and is still important movement to what it has become, because of social media, because of fads, because of what's in vogue, what looks cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but we really need to go back to the basics of embracing who we are as women, and also men understanding their purpose, being born a man as a protector and embracing your strengths that
Mm,
you have. That's not, and also I think we need to say this before we end, that Jung talks about the animus and the
yes.
anima. You know, that
Yeah.
it's that male and female counterparts that each one of us have inside of ourselves.
Hmm.
So we have a part of us that has, you know, that is feminine or that is masculine, you know, and
Hmm.
finding a balance between all those things is really important for us. So I'll leave it at that, because I really feel like there's so much more we can talk about. There's so much more to be said, to be digested, if you will, Marcia, like you said. But thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome. I hope to see you again in a future conversation, Kirsten. I love how you brought such a difficult, complex discussion on our modern interpretation of feminism and how, based on the work of Joanna de Angelis, we can find very current, right, counter discussion or counter uh, arguments to how those interpretations are being met in today's society. But with that, I want to say thank you, everyone, for being here with us. And I'll see you next week in our next episode. Thanks.